basically.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Okay, I have to speak.
German.
No. As all of you probably know, is Jim Losinski, and he is going to be talking about archaeology on the run. So here is a lot of his things that you brought to share with us. And
Okay, tonight we're going to do what I call archaeology on the run. It's a general overview of archaeology here in western Wisconsin, some southern Wisconsin. This is being brought together by our public library. And the idea behind these fireside chats is to inspire people maybe to use the library a little bit more. Look up information and find out more about certain topics that we roughly pick on here over the course of the summer and the fall. So I says, some people think of archaeology and they think of rocks. These archaeologists work on rocks. You know. But yeah, not really. They know a lot about rocks, but they're not geologists. Some people think they work on dinosaur bones. You know, yeah, they know bones, but they're not paleontologists either. Some people think I know something about archaeology. Yeah, I know some stuff, but I've had the good fortune, I would say, to walk with a bunch of archaeologists that are willing to share information with the general public. UWL La Crosse, Ernie Bozart out of Driftless Pathways. I've done different digs with the archaeologists, been to a lot of presentations, and they're willing to share information. Archaeology has evolved. It isn't like years ago where they worked for a museum and they grabbed the biggest and the best, and you just kind of disregarded the general public because I'm being paid to do this for somebody. So I said, they share more information with us nowadays. So I says, this particular stone, there's one, a small one over there, the stromatolite. It's on the corner there. It's about 500 million years old. But I says, archaeology doesn't go back that far because of written language, maybe 30,000, a little bit more. There is no record to look up this stuff. You have to glean this information out of what we find. So basically, they ask you, I says, what is archaeology? And it's a study of past cultures, scientific study. And through the analysis of what they're looking at, the artifacts they find behind, the features that are in the soil levels, I says, you can identify what's been happening there. Is it a summer campsite, winter campsite? What are these people eating? How many people probably were here? What tradition was it? So archaeology is involved in a lot of fields, not just the study of digging a hole in somebody's front yard. There's two types of basic archaeology. Specific, which would be, I'm going to dig in your front yard and we're going to look if there was a Native American campsite right in your front yard. And that's, everybody says, well, geez, that's what archaeology is. They just move in and do something. Well, they have to examine rock shelters and other places like that. But I said, where they do most of their work is salvage archaeology. We are a developing nation. I says, railroads, underground pipelines, new causeways, roadways, roundabouts, any building construction could disturb an archaeological site. A lot of places, if they're federally involved, archaeology gets a percentage of money to come and pre-inspect. When they did Highway 93, and Luann knows they came right in her yard digging holes. But they were checking if there was an archaeological site before the dig was even, or the road was put in, due to the fact that maybe the road could be varied a little bit this way or that. Bluff siding, you see them rocks there. Used to be Johnson's gas station and food. But right in the bluff siding there's some rocks in that hillside. There's a Native American buried there. And the road was moved just slightly so they didn't have to disturb the burials. But I said, just because archaeology was in there and trying to save what's behind us, the most important thing that archaeology does is document. Without documentation, everything is just an orphan. I've got a nice knife point in there. Unfortunately, it's got no documentation. We know it's 12,000 years old. I know it's made out of Prairie du Chien Church. And a fella had it, but he passed away without giving us any information. To find a piece without documentation is just like not finding it at all. because nobody knows what it is. Once you're gone, that's it. I got this, I got it from Grandpa. Fine and dandy, but it doesn't do any good because did Grandpa get it on an auction? Did a friend pass it on to him? Did he actually find it on the farm? And if he did, where? It doesn't tell us anything. It's an orphan piece. So stuff has to be documented. Whether it's a test pit dig like this be like for a road right away or gas line or something, every 15 to 50 feet they will dig a hole, maybe 2 feet down, screen the artifacts, see if there's something in there. If it's a more likely site, the holes will be closer together. Or if it's a phase 3 dig out like that, a salvage excavation, someone has to document everything as it happens. You find an artifact at this level and you find one this much lower, it's on a different level. That's why archaeology dig on just a little bitty trowel and broom and whisk broom kind of a deal. All artifacts are screened through, the dirt is all screened. You run it through a 1/4-inch mesh or smaller depending on what kind of a site it is. And then you end up with a stratified wall after you dig. A wall like this, there's different layers. You can see there's browns and blacks. And each one of those zones represents a different lens. Now this has been enhanced here by a friend of mine there, Driftless Pathways. But he's got it laid out and it tells you the different stratas as these people brought it in. Here is a post that's been dug in. You can see the dip line here. There has to be another one farther down. Here it shows up over here. And it's up there. But someone has to be able to sit down and read these different stratification layers. Now this happens to be a mound that I and Donnie Kowalski had the opportunity to find. We were in the right place at the right time. And when we dug the hole, we hit some clamshells and a little bit burnt sandstone from a hearth. So they decided there must be something there. And we opened it up 3 years later, I believe. And I said it was an extension of a mound right in Trempealeau itself. This was a really nice site.
You mean a burial site?
No, this is a Cahokian site, so it would be more like a temple site. Trempealeau has got really fantastic stuff out in Trempealeau. Like, I'll maybe touch on that a little later here quick. Everything is grid mapped out. This is just a rough grid map. It's not laid out to scale. But each one of these little squares represents a dimension. So someone has to sit down, scribe out, the hill comes out long, and these are all different types of burial mounds. This happens to be the Decorah mound group. But it should be to scale, and this is just depicting the lines through it for, I think this was for the right-of-way when they were doing the road. This site too is all totally gone. It's all destroyed. The reason archaeologists dig with a trowel and a little bitty whisk broom and take forever is like these post molds here. If you would dig this with a spade, you'll never see these. Because you would just take out a chunk and it's just regular dirt. Well, you take it out in levels, as it was. It's like dusting your dresser. You go there on Monday morning, and I says, yeah, I just dusted on Saturday. But there's a doggone mark there, there's dirt there. Add that by 5,000, 10,000 years, it gets deeper. There it goes, there it is. And I said, by taking it off in layers, we can see that something happened here. There's 28 or 29 posts in a row here. This also is in Trempealeau. It could represent maybe like just a drying rack for fish or meat or something. We have no idea. It could be something with the phase of the moon, 28, 29 days, you know. But we found it. They'll find maybe more someday, someplace, 2, 3, maybe more examples of the same thing. You'll be able to maybe combine the knowledge from the sites and actually know what it was used for. There is no written record. We can't go back and ask somebody's grandpa because there is none. It's too old. It's gone. This is over 1,100 years old. This dig, this is the same one that I and Kowalski hit. There was a house under there at one time. You can see the square pattern. That was the inside the floor. This house burned down. These black charred marks here are the wall when it fell in. They were made out of willow and I believe walnut, if I remember right. Then by de-stretch enhancement, it's called, you can strengthen the blues, strengthen the blacks, strengthen the reds, whatever. You can see the better charcoal patterns here. how this wall and these timbers had fallen down and how the posts were laid out into this building. This building was extremely large for a Cahokian building. Usually a Cahokian building may be 3 meters wide, and with this one we figured maybe was, well, it's beyond 6 meters. It's a large building. But you only can go as far as the finances go. That's a drawback on a lot of archaeology. And what do these people do all this mapping on? Well, 2 examples that they do find are a feature, which would be like a storage pit or like a fire burning pit. Now, when they'll dig these pits out, the storage pit was real common in the Oneota period, which was just about the time the settlement, the white sailors, the white Europeans came here. They would dig down and they would store corn in these things. They'd line them with grass, fill them with corn, different seeds. They ate lamb's quarter and they ate the foxtail and all sorts of crazy weeds that we kind of shake our head, but it was seed that they could grind up, mix with their meat, and it helped them survive the winter. They stored in these pits, and when these pits were empty, then they used them as refuge pits, filled them back up, and next year we'll just dig a new one. So these village sites already were established that they were staying in one place. The soil that's taken out of these pits, you'll take the matrix out and a sample, let's say, then they'll wash it. All the light stuff, the wood or like some shell, seed will float to the top. They'll strain that off, screen it, dry it, analyze it. It's blackberry seed, you know, it's raspberry seeds. They can tell it's a hickory nut shell, acorn, whatever the case may be. They can do that. They'll have dendrochronology. Guys will come in, they'll identify, like I said, it was walnut, there was butternut, they knew what kind of wood it was. You can get the years, you know, there's trees, California, 3,000 to 4,000 years old with no problem. The growth rings don't change. So they can take one species to the next, though it's a good summer, a bad summer, and you get the patterns. So they can figure out the age of some of this stuff just by dendrochronology. Basically, excavation is a destructive process. There is no coming back. Once you take it out, you cannot rebuild it. So I said, as these people remove stuff, archaeologists remove stuff, we screen it all for the artifacts, we document where it is. Each layer is noted. You only will go down maybe 2 inches if you do, depending on the density of the artifact. But everything in that layer then is mapped out. This was here, that was there. And you'll go deeper. All organic material can be carbonated, you know, carbon dated if it has to be. Pottery. There are some examples of pottery. In that tray over there. Pottery, the film inside those old clay pots can be removed and we can see what they were cooking. But you know, when archaeology first started, basically all they knew is this is below that, so this has got to be older than that. But we've got the technology, you know, radiocarbon dating only came in the 50s. Before that, it was just speculation. By stratification was the only thing that we knew. They can look at lithics. We can see with X-ray fluorescent where that stone came from. So to have that work, you have to have a piece of stone from the quarry site. So you've got to be able to walk around, find a quarry site, bring the stone into a lab. Somebody's got to do the lab work on it. So they've got let's say the DNA on that rock. So when someone has a lithic stone, this spear point, this looks like the right stuff, they can see this came out of that quarry. So you can set up trade routes. You can set up patterns that these people are doing. I said, there's always a site report, like I said, for every 1 hour they do archaeological dig. It's 3 to 5 hours in the lab, just processing the materials, what's coming up, analyzing, doing the reports. There's a report over there, the back book there, I think it's called a filler site. It's about that thick, you know, and it's only one little phase of a large dig here by Alaska on the interstate. But I said, it all takes so much extra time to do. Most of the stuff is done like during winter, the lab work. All artifacts are numbered. I said, I've got stuff here. I said, it's all got letters and alphabets on it and such. It's so you can identify where it comes from. If it's an orphan, it's lost. It's got no value really for archaeological purposes. It's nice you found one, but nobody can say, well, they ain't going to help us. We don't know who had it, why it was there. We'll have to look at quarry sites. I was just talking to a gentleman here a little earlier this evening, and I said, Wisconsin had the glaciers come through here. So a lot of Wisconsin doesn't have much more than bedrock, the northern third, 2/3. There's not a lot of rock around, but there is some. And the most common stuff I got in these bags here, and I don't know if I should pass it out and you can just play musical chairs with it if you want to look at it later. But there are some bags here. There's Hickston quartzite, Arcadia Ridge here, which we have right out of town a little ways. There's some cataract, Hickston, like I says, Cochrane chert. When I first started with the university, they said Cochrane chert only comes in a brown like this, a real tanny color. That's the only color it has. But after years of persuasion and stuff, it does come in white. It comes in a clear. It comes in a shade of both in between. I said, but the only way you could prove it, you had to go and find a quarry site where it was transitioning from one color to the other. Those guys down at the university are really particular. I said, exploring these sites, I said, this is another site that I found. I said, luckily the landowner let us on there, and this is a picture of Ernie Bozart and I. And the landowner, I said, we did this site undocumented, no one knew it was there. And it's reported now, and it's recorded that lithics, they figure, was coming to Trempealeau around 1050 when the Cahokian people came up to Trempealeau. The closest lithics was this quarry site. We find quartzite in Trempealeau. It's possibly coming out of here, but they haven't done the testing to see what's right. That's a picture of Jim Slesher, and that rock outcropping is just north of town here, Barnes Bluff. Quartzite in there, but it's a real low quality quartzite. Not every rock works well. This is an old, earlier Wisconsin site. These are quartzite ledges. Quartzite is a morphite, can't think of the word. Anyhow, it's a compressed rock. And it's squeezed down. It's sandstone, basically. And I said, you'll come up with a lot of doggone sandstones, different types. There's poorer and better grades, but you'll come up with Hickston. Hickston sandstone is in here, and you can see it's a high quality compressed silica inside of the matrix of this stone. The stone will crack right through a grain of sand because it's so well cemented together. The Arcadia Ridge stuff will end up being rougher because it's not as old, it's not as well formed from compression. Years ago, you could find these things because we had open prairies. The Native Americans would burn stuff, lightning would take off, wildfires would take through. So you just walk along, you can look at a ridge, and I can see there's a rock outcropping that could be a lithic source. They'd go and see. Now you got to go, they're like this, buried in a jungle someplace, or there's a ravine washout with Cochrane chert in it. But it's all done by hoof work now. There's no way to get around this stuff. This is an example of Cochrane chert. Some rock works better if you heat it. I also suspect, or I visualize, that there was a Native American working there one time on a stone trying to make a projectile point or something. He got discouraged and threw it in the fire, and the next day he decided, well, I'm going to try that rascal again, and then it worked better. And they said, wait a minute, that heating did something to change the texture of this stone. So they will heat treat stone. This is Cochrane. Cochrane usually, like I said, comes in tan and white, but see, it comes in black. You heat it, it turns to red. You can have red and white because of the heat. This is Burlington chert. Usually turns to a shade of pink or something if it's been heat treated. Heat treating makes the stone easier to work, but does not quite hold the edge as well as just the raw stone itself. When we look for quarry sites, these are some of the indicators that you look for. A big fracture off the edge of a rock. This edge is wavy. He was taking chunks off of that rascal and cutting himself some discs like that he could make out of it, and testing to see if that rock is going to be suitable for making tools. He's not going to waste a lot of time on it if he can't hobble a good edge on that thing. He says it doesn't pay to nap this. We're moving farther. This one here too. The angle has to be right for flint knapping. It's got to be 90 degrees or less. If it gets over a 90-degree angle, you can break a rock off, and that's what happened here. He was chipping the edge of this rock, but it got too sharp. It was too steep. You can just pound until you get dust, but you won't get more rock off of it. This stone here, you can see the flakes they were taking off this rock. These are both in Buffalo County, by the way. But I said they were taking flakes off this rock, and you can see the hinge fracture where it stopped. But he hit that thing and he took that corner off. And that's where you're coming with that bulb of percussion. Here too, when he hit the edge, it hit this rock fault in the rock. The piece breaks off. No, I give up. It's a good quality stone, but he couldn't get a long enough piece for the piece he wanted to build. You'll have pieces made underneath offall that he has. This happened to be just on top of the ground, and why it's under a rock, a little overhang ledge. It should have been covered, but not. This lip here has a bulb of percussion. There's a bulb of percussion here. There's one on this edge here. Bernard asked me a little bit earlier this evening about bulb of percussion, and there's some in this package here. And bulb of percussion basically says when he smacks this baby, it's a flat spot on top, and I've got it marked here with a black thing. That's the exact area where he hit it to take this flake off. One side will be nice and smooth. That's the way she'll break off. She'll break to a fine edge. The other side can be just rough as ever. But I said he'll use this bulb of percussion. That's how you can tell it's made by man. If it doesn't have a bulb of percussion, it's probably just a freak of nature. Once in a while, Mother Nature, you never say never in archaeology. But I said a bulb of percussion can show up and do that. You can look at these here. There is a stone in here from Bob Kuiper. He's made this. This is a piece of Burlington. He's a napper from Fountain City. You can look at the edge. Every one of these little flakes that he's taking off, the piece that fell on the ground, be maybe as big as a piece of oatmeal, it would have a little bulb of percussion on it. It's the angle. It's the same principle when the BB gun hits the window, it takes that circle out. They're only taking half that circle. And that's how they do flint knapping. Look at them and pass them around.
Jim, what are they striking with? A harder rock?
It could be a wood baton. It can be an antler. It can be, harder rock when you first start. You start out, you'll use a hammerstone. Like this. You'll find these in the field, I says. And the end is just beat half to death already. It's a hammerstone. Sometimes hammerstones like this one's got a little bit of a flat edge. They'll also use it as a mono for grinding corn, grain. You got seeds from lamb's quarter, they're not very big. But they'll grind it, and they made that, what was that meat they had, persimmons or something they called it? They pounded meat up and then they dried it. Can't think of the word right now. Pemmican? There you go.
Jim,
That's the stuff they use.
I hunted a lot of campsites, and you will always find hammerstones.
Yeah.
People will
Yeah.
walk right by them, and they're always about the size of your hand, about the size of and they're usually pyramidal or pyramidal, and you'll see, and sometimes they'll be on both top and bottom. They're very common to find, but most people don't think they're an artifact.
Good stone does this too. You can tell it's a good stone. It's kind of like grandma's china. If it doesn't have that sound, a piece of crushed rock won't make a good arrowhead. It's too soft. Wisconsin one time was going to be an ocean, A billion, 100 million years ago, we had a rift that started, just like the African rift that started right now. And that rift is from Lake Superior and runs down to Nebraska. And the other side, it comes around and hooks down almost to Arkansas. This was going to be an ocean. But for some reason, that rift failed. It might have been when Africa pulled away, we don't know when. But it's 100 million years ago. So then there were volcanoes, just like Hawaii's got. We had that right up here by Duluth. It was boiling out of the ground. But then you've got synclines and anticlines where the rocks are sticking up. Water starts percolating through that and bringing up with it chemicals. And one of the chemicals or minerals it was bringing up was copper. This piece of float copper here is 28 ton. One block of pure copper that came up. Overseas, when we look for copper, it's a copper ore. We got to crush it. And then they got to smelt it down to get the copper out of the rock. Over here, the Native Americans didn't have that problem. They just took a piece of copper and they just started hammering it into the shape they want. Only thing they had to do is stop after a while because it gets brittle if you beat enough, put it in the fire to anneal it a little bit, turn around and just commence the hammering again until you got the shape of whatever tool you want. Here's a piece of float copper. You can pass it around. But there's float copper and trap rock copper. Trap rock is the stuff that's still in the ground compressed between the layers of rock. The float copper already had been exposed. The glaciers took this stuff way down to Ohio. There was Galdane copper coming out of the ground, and it was carried down with the glaciers. It was made into different tools, there's knives, some of your points and stuff. I said they had rat tail spears and stuff. This culture is 3000 BC to about 7000 BC. They made fish hooks out of this stuff. After a while, they quit using copper. They started using it more for ornamental purposes rather than for tool purposes. Don't know why, no written record, you can't ask them why. But for some reason, they start doing that. Then the next thing, I'm going to try to keep pushing here. The next thing we're going to just touch on lightly is pottery. There's some pottery in that big kettle there. Every one of these pots, if you look at, there's a design on this stuff. There's different patterns. A lot of it is the only one I know how to make, because that's what Grandma made. So I said, that's the kind. But sometimes cultures will merge. They'll bump together. So you'll have different types of pottery coming together with a different design on it. Earliest pottery starts about 500 BC. It got real strong around the Hopewell time. Then you got into your Mississippian pottery, which they moved from from sandstone and crushed rock as a temper into pottery. They moved into shell pottery. They started taking oyster shells, clam shells from the river, smashing that up, mixing it with their red clay, so when they tempered it, they could make thinner pottery, and yet it still held its temper. You could still hold the pot up. But once you started making pottery, you had settlement. People started settling down, because these things broke. So, I mean, you ain't going to work 2 months making a couple pots and then have your husband move across town, we break them both. You know, so I mean, they start having pottery as the first sign of settlement that these people are no longer migratory. Another thing that we explore, I said archaeologists have found a lot of are pictographs. Not so common in Wisconsin. This happens to be up at Silver Mound. Ernie Boza does tours yet. It now belongs to the Conservancy. So I said it's hard to get permission there. You almost have an archaeologist to go with you. Before it was privately owned. But now I said the Conservancy is. This site has been only found recently. They estimate there could be 70, 80,000 pictoglyphs. This is made out of, or pictographs. These are made out of red ochre. It's some town in, in Colombia. I don't know if you can pronounce that name. All right. But I said, anyhow, some of these pictographs in here are like of mammoths and mastodons. They figure some of this painting in here could be 10, 12,000 years old. You can look that up on the internet. This over here, they use charcoal a lot of times. So take a wooden stick, burnt out of the campfire, the end was there, they would draw a picture. This happens to be a Oneota site. I believe this was, no, it's a Mississippian site. I forget which Tanner Cave maybe it is. I'm not positive. I think it could be Tanner Cave, La Crosse County. But it's a charcoal drawing. This you can get some off. You can date charcoal if you can get enough of it. You can have pictoglyphs. A pictoglyph, I said, is just a scratching. They carve it into the rock, and you will find those. Wherever we have sandstone, we can have glyphs. And this is what usually happens to it when people know that there happens to be a nice sandstone ledge, and there's someplace Native Americans were there, and this is what usually happens to it. Somebody goes over there, and it's Sam and Mary and whoever else it may be. There were in Trempealeau, 1897, I believe is the year, and this is an original photo. And you can see on here, they're hard to see. These hands were, I think, 13, 14 inches high. Here's pictures of them. There's a whole article on it. I don't know if somebody wants to read it or not. You can pass the picture around. You can look at the article later. You can see there's a few hands on here. When we did the railroad, they needed fill for the railroad. So here was a handy ledge. So in Trempealeau, that's underneath the ledge someplace. It was right in Perot Park, but it's been hauled away. Here's some petroglyphs of some caves that I found here. You always see this AW, and I don't think it's Alwajik. But it seems to be just by a coincidence that I said, what these grooves are, everybody said, well, that's for sharpening axes and stuff. And it is. To some extent, they'll put this in there and they'll be working down the edge of these stones. They also do it with a leg bone or rib bones or something to make an awl out of them, sharpen them up. They'll do it with bone. And they'll cut into the sandstone as soft, and they'll do this. So I said, you'll find tool-making marks like this, and you'll find other marks. Here's tool-making marks. This is Robert Bozart. And I got a picture of this. I'll send it. There is a deer here I found. This is the tail. The backbone runs up here. The neck's up here. The bottoms are down here. Leg is here. This deer is about this big. We found that one, and Ernie documented that one. Here's another deer, and this one, just a stick thing, kind of like Fred Flintstone make it, backbone and that. This one has a heart line. There's a stick down the middle and a little triangle point right in the center over here, and it's what they call a heart line. 1,100 years old, thereabouts. And let's see, this picture, it says top. Yeah, and I got a red dot or two on the tail and a few along the edge here. You can see the rough outline of that deer. This one over here, yeah, is the other deer with the triangle point in it. This one is the same one that's up as Ernie's here, only it's not as big. On the back, there's a big flake removed off of a piece of Cochrane shirt. This block's about this big. And this is a celt that I found, and I told that girl, you dig it out. I'm not for digging with a whisk broom and a little picky thing. But that also was a dig. I and the wife were on a trip. We went to Walnut Grove to have a sandwich at Nellie's Cafe. And on the way there, we stopped at Jeffers Petroglyphs. Interesting little site. This is Sioux City quartzite. There's, I think it's 20 acres, that site, if I remember right, Doc. I think it's 20 acres. Over here, he wets this down. It was a real sunny day. This is an atlatl. An atlatl is a device for launching your spears and stuff farther. Here's an atlatl, and here's another one up there. This is a buffalo. Here's the head, the hump, the legs. Here's another animal of some type. These lines here remind you of the bottom chin skin on a whale. This is glacier. When those glaciers come through, this Sioux City rock is just hard as sin. But she scratched that. Those glaciers were really making marks. And you can see the glacier marks, but there's thousands of petroglyphs in Jeffers, Minnesota. A couple-hour drive, but kind of worth it. Another thing archaeologists document are these geoglyphs. Too big to take home, but they find them. This ice is South America, Nazca lines. We've seen them. Out Wyoming, the medicine wheels. I think Doc has seen a few of those already. They come in all different sizes. Sometimes you'll just find a ring. The ring was just from weighting down like the edge of a teepee. So the wind wouldn't be taking the flaps. A lot of times they would just put that on. But I said, it's still part of the doggone history of archaeology. Archaeology in Wisconsin started with this man, Increase Lapham. He was anthropologist, philanthropist, whatever you want to call him. Worked on canals and stuff, but he really had a good eye for detail. So he started mapping the mounds and the land that was being wasted after the logging up in northern Wisconsin, the erosion that was caused on the land. And he wrote a book called The Antiquities of Wisconsin. You can get this book online. You can download it. He's got a bunch of Indian mounds that he's mapped. But he started it. But then along come this here Theodore Lewis, and that guy used a footmobile, trainmobile, horse, and whatever else he could. And he mapped between 12,000 and 15,000 mounds in Minnesota, Wisconsin, mainly along the Mississippi River, down into Illinois. A lot of the mounds that he mapped are gone. There's only about 85% of the mounds are probably gone right now. About 15% of the mounds are still left. Many of the mounds that Lewis did, that's the only record of the mounds, are his records. He was meticulous on his mounds, but one place he went, he said there were over 100 mounds, he documented it. But he also said that there's probably another 100 that have been dug in. They've been hit by plows or somebody's been looted them. So he just didn't even document them because they're already messed up. So he just skipped over those mounds. This is the Serpent Mound in Ohio, first protected mound in the United States, 1,350 feet long. And I'm not going to talk about that because we're not going there anyhow. Effigy mounds. The Effigy Mound Park is an interesting park if you got nothing to do on a Sunday. It's a good drive. It's right down by Prairie du Chien. A little bit of a hike up the hill, but there's benches. You can get up there and see what's up at Effigy Mound. But this, basically, we have conical mounds, linear mounds, intaglio mounds, platform mounds, or these three types of effigy mounds, representing effigy are the animal mounds, the earth, air, or water representation. This, I don't know, I think Hank is sitting right over here in this building here. Right there, yeah, right there. This is LiDAR. This is an overview of here's a football field, the high school. And when we take a picture in real time, we can turn around and convert it to LiDAR. It's light detecting and ranging. And it's laser, 60,000 beats a second here. It comes back down, comes up, kind of on a radar principle, only it's more specific. There's a berm right there. You can see it right in front of that, where the flag, right behind the flagpole. See it here on LiDAR? Over here, this mound over here is Wanek Center, Jim Reed. This is Reed's monument. There's some other works down here along the road and stuff. LiDAR has been a real blessing for archaeology and finding mounds. You can get on LiDAR, you get on the right site, and it's on that paper. This thing is solid jungle. It's nothing but trees. We use LiDAR. This is in Guatemala. But it took all the trees away, and this is what you see. There's one rail of a village site here. This is a mound I documented in Buffalo County. No, Pepin County. This is the mound in real time. You went over there, I took this picture, talked to the guy, and he said this is the best deer hunting stand he's got. But this is what it shows me on LiDAR. Now when I took pictures from the different angles, that's what the numbers are for. It's got the direction. This mound is 5 feet high on this side, on the lower side. Most mounds come out, they're below knee high. So mounds are not the easiest thing to walk in the woods and say, there's one. But LiDAR does a big job on it. Here they're harder to see. I should have zoomed better. These mounds here are in a river bottom. You can see the floodplain coming through here, different branches from streams and sloughs. The group of mounds in here. Here I zoomed in a little bit. And some of these mounds you can see they've got chicken pox or something. See that spot in them? Those mounds have been looted. Mounds were not protected until 1985. Before that it was legal to dig a mound. There was a group in Winona called the Redmonds Club. They'd jump on a train and we're going to go and dig mounds on a Sunday afternoon. They'd take the train, go someplace, dig mounds. Museums would collect Native American skulls due to the fact that they could show that the Native American was more inferior because his skull looked a different shape than something to the European people.
Where were those mounds, Jim?
Those are in the bottoms here, in the Black River bottoms.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, do you start by walking the property and seeing what you think might be a mound and then go to the LiDAR? Or
No, I do it the other way around.
you start with the LiDAR?
Yeah, it saves a lot of walking.
Yeah.
And the thing is, LiDAR's taken, there's another computer enhancement, and when it comes to computer, I'm not the world's greatest guy. If I can't hit it with a hammer, you can't fix it. But anyhow, LiDAR's taken from one angle, and that plane's going by, it's taken this picture. Well, it's that way. But there is an enhancement that you could go to have it come that it's showing from this way or this way. So a lot of these mounds will not show up, but if you're on a different angle now, they will show up. So it's a little bit tricky, but I said, usually the ones that I find, it's a mound. And the more you find, the easier they are to identify. You look, that's a mound. Because you find, it's like looking for morels once you find one. Okay, this is Fire Point. This is at Effigy Mound Park, overlooks the Mississippi River. A little bit of a hike to get up this hill, but there are just rows of these mounds. And these are all little conical mounds. Here's conical mounds in winter. This is Nichols Mound on Highway 35 right out of Trempealeau. It'll be on the right as you're heading on this, from Trempealeau to Holman. It's about 1.25 miles out of town. Brennigan owns it now. That mound was 12 feet high and about 90 feet on the bottom. When it was originally excavated in 1928 by the University Milwaukee Museum, they came up. Inside this mound was a mausoleum. There was a building with bodies inside, and they were put in with grave goods, I guess is what you would call it. Some of these knives are 2 feet long. There's pearls in there. These knives are from Wyoming. They're out of obsidian. Yeah. Here's some obsidian. They're out of obsidian. The mound itself, about the year between 480, 400 BC, someplace in there, about the time of Christ, right about the year 0, give or take. This was the Hopewell culture. The Hopewell was real influential on anybody that lived kind of along the major waterways. Hopewell came out of Ohio. They had a trade network where they were down Mississippi bringing stuff out of the Gulf Coast. They were bringing stuff out of the Dakotas. There's Knife River Flint. I think there's a piece here someplace. I know there's a piece here. Yeah, here's some Knife River Flint. This comes from North Dakota. Hopewell would bring in Knife River Flint. But all these Native Americans, they had a trade network. There had to be some type of a way to get some of this rock to Wisconsin. This is a lineal mound. Don't ask me where I took the picture from because I didn't have a name on it. I don't know which town this was in. A lineal mound, I believe, is one mound after another mound, and then they added people in between, and ends up being a lineal mound. I do not know if every person got a mound. Don't ask me. I don't know. Maybe an archaeologist would have to find one of those guys. But there were a lot of mounds in Wisconsin. This is an intaglio. An intaglio mound is the exact opposite. They don't make a mound, they dig a mound. And you look at this, it's 125 feet long, and well, it's just a hole in the lawn, and there were a few more, and this is the only one that I think that's left in Wisconsin. And when it rains, it fills with water, now it's a water spirit. That's why it was done. You had, remember I said there's earth, there's the animal ones, the bird ones, the air, the land, and then the underground, the water. The different types of mounds. Here we have LiDAR again showing different types. This is an effigy mound. This is the 10 Bears mound in effigy mound. This is about 2.5 mile hike. The office is down here someplace. Here's a big eagle. Here's a lineal mound. Here's lineal mounds. Here's a mound you can see has been pillaged. Some type of little animal, a little dog, wolf, something there. Richland County. Same thing here. These are water spirits. You can see they're made a little bit different. Here's eagles with no heads on them. You know, a little bit different, maybe eroded away. Look at the eagle mounds in this one. Just oodles of them. It's all in the woods. If it had been any place else, that would have been long plowed. There was one, and I could not find a picture of it, and I don't remember the name of the town. When you get older, you don't remember stuff no more. But the wingspan was 1/4 mile. And they didn't find it until 1937 and 38 when we did the first aerial photography of the state of Wisconsin. They flew over this farmer's field, and there it is, this big black eagle laying there in his field, and it's already been leveled off and taken away. But there is a picture of it, and it's probably one of the biggest ones there were. Here's one. This has to be in a park. It's burned. But you could see that eagle mound over there almost looks like an intaglio, but it's not because the ground has been taken and added to the eagle. But when it rains, it turns out right. The Thunderbirds. This is the Mendota Health Complex. Aerial fold, you look at it, there's a few green berms over here, and the reason they are is because, see the eagles here? They've been preserved. There's a lot of effigy mounds and mounds still around in Madison itself that haven't been destroyed, but most of Milwaukee had plenty of them. They're all gone. But this one here, just an example. I said it's a spirit mound of some type, 2 legs on it here. And it's probably less than knee high. So if you'd be just walking through the woods picking mushrooms, you probably wouldn't even know it. You know, and it's 100 and some feet long. Man mound down by Baraboo, been declared his national historical thing. The legs were cut off when they did the row. He's 214 feet long. I think some ladies group or something is what preserved him. Otherwise, that would have probably been gone also. It's in the state park now. The Decorah mounds, these mounds are almost all, well, they are gone. When you go to Galesville, and you just go on the other side of the stoplights, you go over that hill. There was a Teskey body shop on the right there. And then there was Gary Grant's. Now he sold it to somebody else. Then there's some nice fields owned by Mr. Abel right now. This is where they are. Gary Grant's house would be here, and Teskey's is over here. Now the top picture was done by C.H. Lewis, the guy that was over here way back when. And see, he said there were 14 conicals, 7 something there. That's what. But after a while, when Squire come through, 1914, there were so many less of them already were gone. From agriculture, they've been going. The highway come like right through here. So these 13 would have been across the road, and Hunter's Bridge would be down into this way over here. But they're all gone. I always thought there was an elderly lady on a thing on a Whitehall TV, and she says she remembered when she was a child. She said it snowed one time, not hard, but there was enough snow. When the sun came up, she said it thawed all the mounds. You could see the mound, but everything else was snow. But how many people had a camera? You know, but she remembers it. Platform mound. Somebody asked me about Cahokia and Trempealeau. This is a platform mound. This thing covers 14 acres. You can go down to Collinsville, Illinois. I wouldn't go now. The museum is being overhauled. They're remodeling. And I think it might take another year or two, but they have a super museum. We went down there 4 or 5 years ago, and I show you all kinds of pictures, but they're on the other computer, the one that went, so that kind of took care of that, but there was all kinds of nice pictures. But anyhow, I said there are a lot of mounds here. There's a real good book there, I said, on Cahokia. And these people moved from Cahokia. They sent a little pilgrimage group to Trempealeau. And that's where I got into a lot of archaeology with Ernie Bozart and his wife, Danielle. And they've dug in Trempealeau like 10 years. Whitehall has taped a number of them. I think there'd be films you could probably get from Whitehall of touring, auditions with the girls and the guys that were down there. But I said, these people came up. It was one of the probably 30 to 50,000 people lived in this village. They were big corn farmers or whatever. The Mississippi bottoms that was their home country. And they don't know what really happened, but Ascalon has got a little influence by them. They were a little bit down here by Stoddard for a while. But Trempealeau has 3 mounds like this. Well, I'll take that back. 5 mounds. There's 3 on top of the hill, which you can go and visit. There's a trip, the Trempealeau Interpretive Trail that Ernie and Danielle set up for Trempealeau. You can see artifacts we dug at Trempealeau in the library. You can see it in Perot Park. We helped build that, I and Donnie Kowalski. But there's a bunch of stuff in there. But there's an interpretive trail, not that hard of a trail once you get about the first 60 feet. Then it kind of runs linear with the hill. It's pretty easy to get to the top. And you can get where the 3 mounds were up there. George Squire documented, he had pictures of them. And in the 30s, Trempealeau put a water tower right on the biggest one. And at least another story, whatever. There was another one downtown. That one was hauled away. And then when I and Donnie happened to bump into another site, we found another unknown mound. Flint knapping, we're going to try, I think, if everything works right, Bob Kiefer is going to come from Fountain City. He's an expert flint knapper. He's going to do something for the museum down here in probably June or July. We'll have something in the paper or on our website. The museum has got a lot of artifacts down there yet the guy can see. I said, we have a mammoth bone there that's about this big, rear leg. There are mammoths found here by Arcadia. That's another big story, right? Okay. Jim Slesher's grandfather lives here in Thompson Valley, just a little ways up the valley where the bridge crosses the road. And his grandfather found a big wooden bone. He thought it was wood. He wasn't sure. He took it in, and a guy looked at it and he said, yeah. He said, see that round spot there? He said, that was a rock. And the crick was rolling that rock around, and it wore that out, and it's just a big chunk of root or something. You know, well, that rock hole there was a hip joint. And he had a piece of a pelvic bone. Then that was 1953. 55, he comes up, he's got a part of a tusk. So he said, it's a mammoth. Now we know that this bone and this kind of makes something. Well, he thought it could be a mammoth, but see, there's a difference. Mammoth and mastodon they're not alike. But then he found a tooth, and that tooth and jawbone said it's mammoth. And we went as a historical society to Milwaukee and asked them, can we have one of these back, put it on display here? They couldn't find it. Typical state museum. Some of the stuff was written with a pencil, and if you want, it was gone. I said, there you go. Then after a while, they did find one of them, and they said, we'll send you a picture at $50 a picture. How many pictures do you want? Different story. Anyhow, arrowheads come in different sizes, but you only can make the arrowhead that your grandfather and your father knew how to make. You didn't know there was a different style because that's the only one there was. So I said, as necessity changed the style of the head, the size of the head, when you needed something for a different culture or a different, from mammoth, you're going to go down to hunt deer. Well, you don't need a big one. You need something smaller. You need something lighter. Different technology. The early people were with spears. Occupied Wisconsin, we divided up archaeologically into 4 main groups. Paleo, Archaic, Woodland, and the Oda. Paleo, 10,000, or 12,000 to 8,000 BC. These people, I says, it's so hard to really get a handle on them. It's so long ago. Nothing stays. We can't find any plant material. Can't find what they ate. It's all rotted away. The soil in Wisconsin eats up the bones. You don't know what happened. Were the bodies cremated when someone passed away? They leave them for the buzzards? We don't know. You know, I mean, they had different styles of interment of the dead. But there had to be small groups. I mean, how many fish could you catch? You only could, have that many fish. The bigger family you got, the more fish you got to have. And it wasn't that they found some mammoths associated with paleo points, saying that these people were eating them. Now, how can we really say that they were really hunting them? It's not written down. But they had a seasonal round that weekend, they tell. We have found Hickston solidified sandstone in these sites. And in the end, they would come back and get some more and go around. That's why documentation is so important, because you can follow these sites by the pattern of the stone. You find a stone in Ohio, it either had to be traded or somebody had to bring it. We find stuff from South Dakota here, traded or somebody had to bring it. There was up by Green Bay, over here, by Reiner's site, in this area, there was a lady buried there about 2,000 years ago, and she had a piece of obsidian from Wyoming with her. Well, I doubt if that elderly lady walked there and got it. They had to trade it into this area, and I don't know, when you got it, I wanted a bigger piece. I don't know, but they had it here. So they had a big network set up. There was a lot more to Native Americans than we can just tell by looking at stains on the ground. George McJunkin, African-American guy, freed by the slaves, self-educated. And he was really into environmental stuff, and he was looking for some cattle. He was working on a ranch. And in 1908, he came across this arroyo and this draw, and in there he seen these large bones, and he said, they're too big for buffalo. They're definitely not cattle. So he reported it to the archaeologists, and they were right on the spot. And in 1927, when they dug it, he went over there, and they found bones associated, Clovis points associated with bones that are 10,000 years old. Man had to be in the United States, had to be here 10,000 years. Before that, the general consensus was no more than 4,000 years. Indians could not have been here prior to 4,000 years ago. This was the guy that changed it. Then later, 1929, they turned around, they hit a Clovis site in Clovis, New Mexico, turned around, and it was below Folsom. Clovis has to be the oldest thing there is in the United States. There's never been nothing older. These were the first people that settled here. Clovis points are distinctive. They have a flute taken out of the sides. Then it aids in hafting. They envision these people would run up and you'd stab your old woolly mammoth for supper and then run like the wind. This is what they kind of figured. But this is the technology they believed. But then along, there always was somebody coming along and said, I think there's something older than Clovis. But, you know, archaeologists, too, are kind of the old flat earth theory. You know, you can sail a boat and fall off the end of the earth. Yeah, it took many years before they finally decided, well, maybe there could be something older than Clovis. Once you hit Clovis, there was nothing below that. But now they started hitting like Paisley Cave up in Oregon, and Monteverde down here, over 14,000 years old. And boy, there was guys went right there. They called them down, the same thing they did with Clovis. Come here and look at this stuff. And they looked at it and they said, yeah, you're right, this is older. And then after they left here, some of them said, nah, I don't think that was right. But when he was there, it was okay. But then we came up with White Sands here just a few years ago. And there's a volcanic layer at 21,000 years. And there's another one at 23,000 years. And these kids were running between them two layers, them footprints. So there had to be somebody in California 20,000 years ago. Here in Wisconsin, we got the Schaefer Mammoth, dug in '64. A guy was digging a trench and he hit a couple of bones. And they said, by golly, you hit a mammoth. But they never dug the whole mammoth out until '94. Don't ask me why, but they did. And when they dug him, there was one up the road. We might as well get this one too. But I said, these two mammoths, 12,000 BC, they have cut marks on the bones. There had to be Native Americans working on these things. The bones have been sorted. They cut the piece off, put it on that pile, get a new one. So I said, that proves that there were Native Americans in Wisconsin. You know, 10,000 BC, no problem. Here we are at the Boaz Anderson mastodon. I said, the original mammoth here at the Boaz, when they turned around and had that one, they only had 2 bones from it. But then they added the Anderson to it, and then they made another one, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. But I think, yeah, there only were 2 bones on this one. This is the difference. You need that tooth. Mammoths eat grass, so they have to have a grinder for grinding grass. Mastodons eat brush and twigs, small stuff like that. They got a thing that designed just specifically for that. That's how you could tell the difference between these people. In the later paleo, as the mammoths disappeared after the Ice Age, they started changing it. They were hunting bison, the straight-horned bison, and they started using different technologies. They started using different spears. You get the agate basins, you get the Scots bluffs, you get the Dalton points. Here's the Scots bluff again. And then you have scrapers. There was a gentleman had a scraper here earlier this evening. A scraper, one edge has been worked so that you can take the meat off of a hide. University says you always find scrapers, so they had, it might have been Bob Kiefer, make some scrapers so they could have the students do experimental archaeology to show how these scrapers work. Take some meat off some old deer hide there, and it didn't work worth a darn. They couldn't figure out why don't these scrapers work. And after a little bit of analysis, they said, wait a minute, you know, we find all these scrapers, but these scrapers are wore out. So they threw them away. So that one, they made a new scraper, they made it sharp like it's supposed to be, and it worked like a dream. But unless you do experimental archaeology, you don't understand what's happening. As the climate changed, so did the technology change. The people started using more. You had the copper coming in there during that time. They relied on deer hunting more heavily because that seemed to be the dominant animal. There was elk around. They started using rock shelters. You get in the rock shelters, you'll start finding archaic stuff in there. But I do not believe we've ever found paleo in a rock shelter. But never say never. And the biggest thing that they came up with, they came up with stone ground tools. And here I said, here's an axe. We've got a ground groove on the edge. Here's another one. Nobody knows why they started making stone ground tools, but myself personally, I think it is because these people got over 25 or so and they started needing bifocals. And it's hard to make an arrowhead if you can't see. But you can sit there and pound all day, because that groove is put in like this with another rock. And you pound that to dust and you take that rock out and you make it. And when you got it in the rough shape, you go to a rock shelter, you start shaping it, and you finish it off. So I think that's why they started doing more stone ground tools. Then the archaic tradition also comes up with the atlatl. Now there's different variations of the atlatl. Some throw a small shaft, some throw a long shaft. Atlatls will have weights. We got these at the museum. These are banner weights. They're dropped on the atlatl itself to put more inertia behind the throw. Here is an example. There's an atlatl weight hanging on the back of this atlatl. The atlatl is only this long. The spear is about 4 feet long. The end of the spear is removable, like this. It's taped up here with sinew. It's enforced so it doesn't break. They throw it. This piece stays in the animal. This falls to the ground. You go and pick it up, put a new end in, and you use it over. Otherwise, you're walking through the woods with a bunch of these, and that don't work so good. But it does work out well when you figure this. We only got to have a little pouch and these short stems with the right type of point on it. But the points had to get lighter, because if it was too heavy, you couldn't throw it very far. So technology dictated, change the size of the points. Knife River flint, I said, you do find some. I said I had a few examples here. I know there's been some Fountain City traded in. There was more trade work in that archaic period because these people started being more sedimentary. We had the seasonal rounds when you had the paleo people running around, because they were here and they'd go far. Hey, kept moving around. They didn't have a solid campsite, let's put it that way. But archaic people already started staying more in one area. This is another place we stopped. This is a Pipestone Quarry. Pipestone, they've made a lot of just that, pipes out of it, and different ornamental things. There's a picture on the next slide. There's Sioux City quartzite, and then it changes to pipestone. This thing we didn't realize until after we were gone. See, this is the guy's nose. But examples of pipestone here, a lot of these smoking pipes and different ornamental things were made out of this catlinite. In Barron, Wisconsin, they have a catlinite. It's a little bit deeper red. I think there's some in Minnesota, and I believe there's a little bit of a purple-hued thing comes out of Baraboo. Most common point were the rads and the copper points during the archaic period. There are other points, but these are most common. Like I said, full groove. Axes, they could be full grooved all the way around, or three-quarter grooved. One side isn't grooved. Some can only be hafted on both sides. Some are not hafted at all. A lot of the projectile points during early archaic point, they're beveled real heavily on one side. I think there's one or two in that board over there. But from the end, you look at them, you can see the slope on them. One-way beveling on them. Distinctive for archaic period. Then we get into our woodland tradition, 500 BC to 1200 AD, and this is the time pottery. Before this time, we're drinking water out of some old goat skin bag, and I don't think that would have been the best, but that's what we got. So now we went into pottery, and they started doing more mounds. There were a few mounds at the end of the archaic period. They started doing the mounds here really heavily in the woodland period. They lived in groups of over 100. They had burial rituals. I said squash and sunflower, the main gardening things. They did a lot of gardening or started the early horticulture. Pottery, like I said, the different styles of pottery, they change as they evolve. Pottery is about the only thing that you can identify fairly close to age. But the bad thing, when you get into the woodland period, you start ending up with multicultural sites. Because there was a good place for Grandpa to sit, there was a good place for my grandma to sit, and a good place for my uncle to sit. Now we're going to sit here. So then you start having more than one type of material in the same place. Because now we got a woodland point, but it's laying on an archaic site. Yes, because we use the same place. It's a good place to be. There's water here, there's a lot of animals, we're sticking. So I says, you do get an overlap sometimes. So you have to be able to read your sites, see what you're picking up. The bigger points, when you start getting into this time period, they're all knives. This for cutting meat off of bones and working that meat up. There's a scraper or two here. These smaller things, all at ladle points, you know. Few bow and arrow will come in a little later at the end of the woodland period. This is a Hopewell point over here, Hopewell knives. Few bow and arrow things up in the top there, really light. Then you get in the Oneota period. These are the people that the Europeans would have met, the Oneota. They were here to about 1650. They lived in their small groups. And at that time, they believed we were getting into a packed landscape. There was no place to move. You had to stay here because over the hill somebody else was living. You didn't have the choice. We can move over there if the game gets scarce. After a while, they started running out of areas to move. There were a lot of people. But I said, they just run out of places to go. But I said, they raised a lot of corn, squash, and beans. They're called the Three Sisters. And one grew on top of the other. And when you get to La Crosse, where the new Menards is up here, non-Alaska, there's Cedar Creek Golf Course. And I believe it's number 5. This is underneath number 5. These were, whoops, I touched something I shouldn't have. These are ridge and furrows. Native Americans raked the ground together and they were raising crops on these humps. And just by luck, that was going to be a brand new development. The archaeology from UWL were down there and they did this dig and they hit these ridge and furrows, really rare to find them. This is Jim Thaler. He's a retired professor from UWL, bone specialist. He's holding a hoe made out of stone. But once the Oneota got going, they used buffalo scapulars. That buffalo stuff had to be traded in here because we almost were out of buffalo by this time. Typical Madison Point bow and arrow. It was made, they found buffaloes out west killed with these little triangle points. They were shot. When you pull them out, the triangle thing goes in, just like in the old TV thing. You know, the triangle stays in. But I said, bow and arrow, it had to be something light, a nice projectile point. Most of them made out of solidified sandstone. They were locally kind of made out of the stone that was available in the area. They changed from the axe, they went to the celt. Here's a picture of a hafted axe and a celt. And a celt will work, I said, you can remove it, and it also works nice if you pull on a deer hide and you can just cut the meat right away from the hide. They had a lot of trade at this time because that was the contact period. They started using brass kettles, you know, little brass, the trade axes, beads and such. I said, we acquired this bunch of beads in a pile here and we put them together and they're on display at the Historical Society Museum. People always ask who was here and who was then. Well, here, the maps vary. And this only works, you can only go back a ways and then already you can't say for sure that's who lived there. Because you had the Paleo period, you had the Archaic period, you go to the Woodland period. Then this is the time of the Oneota here. You had the Dakota Sioux and stuff. They maybe were always here, but maybe these boundaries weren't so prominent. I mean, you know, they could have varied. And they don't know what tribe somebody was part of because there's no records to go back to say, well, that's who owned this or who lived here at this time. But this is the best concept they can come up with. And being that you just missed this, by next year you'll forget. The first Saturday of every March, UWL La Crosse has an artifact show. We just had another large show, tremendous turnout. Local collectors bring in artifacts, put them on display. People come and they talk and they ask information. They bring in stuff for identification. And the archaeologist will tell you what you got, how old it is, what it's made from. And they won't put it on the front page of the La Crosse Tribune so that somebody's on your front yard tomorrow looking for a piece. I mean, they keep this stuff as for academic purposes, to see the patterns, which culture, what tradition lived there at that time, where it was found. These are two old gentlemen. They're both gone, but they were some characters, Otto and John Swainus. Otto and John, another example. They found his bone in the creek, and the best guess anybody said it's from a horse. It's a mammoth. It's this part. And they found that, and the archaeology department was doing the dig on Cedar Creek. And John and Otto told them to come over, and this was laying on the porch, and they just couldn't believe these guys had a mammoth bone laying on their porch. After a while, John and Otto had them come, and they said, you know, there's a rock shelter up on the hill up here. The archaeologists were in there, and they said, it doesn't appear to be anything in there, but John and Otto were determined. They pulled out this bag. This thing is made out of nettles. You can go break a nettle off right now. There'll be old dry stem, but it's got strings in it. Those strings are woven together, and it's a nettle gathering bag. It's about this big, donated to the university. I said, John and Otto had found it, but they shared the knowledge they had with the university. This was pulled out of the Mississippi River, I just forget, not that many years ago. Maybe, well, probably 20 years, but it doesn't seem like many years ago. But it wasn't Winona paper. And somebody pulled that elk rack out of there. The university has that also. This hip bone I found is still being identified, or they might guess. Mammoth bone, molar, I think it was 22 years old and found in Wamedy. A little bit artifact show, artifact identification here. To Ernie Bozard identifying a woodland knife here. All of the documentation. You know where this canoe was found? On 6th Street in La Crosse. Somebody was walking along and says, there's a canoe right there. You know, I said, how can you? There's got to be more story than someplace on 6th Street in La Crosse. But anyhow, it's there. Okay. Remember, for comments here, I got a few comments I'll put in here. Wherever you go, I said make sure you always get permission. Just don't go willy-nagging around and going in someplace getting somebody else in trouble. Document what you find. If people find stuff, I says, make sure you document where it's found and when it is. Even if it's for your own family's record. Grandpa found this, but it was right by that tree over there because we've got the records. And somebody else said, hey, I found this over here too. So I can add that to Grandpa's ledger. At least you know where it is. Share it with the archaeologists. They aren't going to tell anybody else, but they'd like to know what you found. What culture was there? What time period were they there? Was it traded in? How did it get there? How many people were there at the time? Respect the land and the landowners, and especially respect if there's rock art. Don't go and mutilate it. Rocha Cree, I believe that's the right one. The only public place you can go look at it. No, it isn't Rocha Cree. I'll stand corrected. There's one cave. Somebody went in there with an electric grinder, and they tried to cut out one of the glyphs, but they didn't get it out. But they got it whacked out. They just reckon it for the next guy. State, federal, and all parks are protected. You can't go in there digging without a special permit, whatever else. All mounds are protected. Mounds are cemeteries. Since 1985, if there's a mound, nobody can, archaeologists can't dig a mound without special permits. So I says, we've got some enlightenment now in saving some of our archaeological sites, but so many have been lost, but yet there's still stuff being found every day because people go out there and they share this knowledge. I've got a list hanging right there. It's taped over there. Jenny taped it up for me. I would advise you, if you've got a cell phone, to take a picture of that list. If you want information on any of this stuff, I said, Ernie up here, Driftless Pathways, I got some of his books over there. He writes books that you can actually understand. There aren't words in there this long. There's some are this big, but I mean, there aren't the real long ones in there. For the common person to understand archaeology, he's got some really great books. Wisconsin Archaeological Society has got a lot of information. I've got some journals up there. They send you an annual journal. I think it's only like $20 a year or something like that, $25 a year. It isn't a lot. Well, someplace it says in here. Someplace in here it says, but it's not a lot of money. But like I said, they are another good source for information. UWL and La Crosse. I said, those people bend over backwards to help explain stuff to you. You go in there, and I said, they'll talk. I said, you almost got to kind of call to make sure somebody's there, because they're always on field expositions and things like that, but they try to have somebody on hand. But they do share a lot of information. They sell a lot of books and things like that, other things else, you know, to keep you informed. Wisconsin Historical Society, free data on the internet. You just go on there and type in some stuff and just look. You can find a lot of neat stuff. Minnesota's another one. They have archaeological journals like that. They have a few Zoom things now since COVID. So I said, they've been interesting to listen to some of those. There's a LiDAR site on there. You can look up stuff, find your own mounds, get them documented. Antiquities Wisconsin. So you go to the library, you can download that Laffin's book. Here's 2 sites you can find. You go on the internet, there's all kinds of stuff. There's a one on there, it's called Time Team. It's out of England. These guys go and they'll open up a site with a backhoe. You know, but the minute they go down that far, it's usually Roman. But then they go on. They go back to the Lithic period. They go back farther in there. It's an interesting show. And they did a TV special just to see if people would watch. Ended up for 20 years they were doing shows. They did 200 and some shows, and people would tune in every night. They didn't watch nothing else. We're watching Time Team because it was archaeology. It's interesting. There's another one here. It's the Gordo site here. It was on that seasonal round. It's up by Green Bay over there. Another interesting site. It's on YouTube. And with that, this is the last screen. I ain't got nothing to say. If you got questions, you just out of luck.
Jim, in all the artifacts you found yourself, have you found anything archaic or paleo?
Oh, yeah.
Really old stuff around here?
Yeah.
Paleo around here?
Yeah, you betcha. I found pieces, I said, yeah, 12,000 years old already. And like I said, that unknown orphan there is 12,000 years old, but that was given to me. But like I said, yeah, I found paleo. But you know, it's like finding your morel mushroom spot. You don't tell nobody where you found it. University knows, but nobody else does. Because then somebody else will go there, and they might find the other half. I have one artifact at home I found 6 years apart, broken. 6 years. Walk back, and I found the other end of it. And it was bad. I'm the one that broke it. It was on my farm.
When they traded, did they trade chunks of rock, or was it always the finished product that they traded?
Probably both. Because I said, you'll find Hickston points, Clovis points, way down in Kentucky. Well, you would think somebody used it, but there had to be more to that. Because, when there only was 10, 12 people, my daughter's got to marry somebody, so there had to be somebody in the seasonal round where we get together and she picks up a boyfriend, and they start their own little family someplace. So part of the dowry may have been a nice paleo point. Paleo was, most Clovis points are made out of high quality material. One, because of the fluting, it takes a good quality piece to make it. But I said, I think there still was a value of, this is an exquisite piece, and that's going with my daughter, or whatever the case may be. It's a trade item, When you go to Hickston, the KOA campgrounds, like I said, before you could go up there, now you got to have permission. You got to have permission to go in there. Let's leave it at that. Part of the KOA campgrounds is privately owned. And those farmers, if you talk to them, they may allow you in there, but you have to talk to them, onto their section. But I said that it's now governmentally protected, so it isn't destroyed. When Silver Mound was originally, when the first settlers came here, they thought Silver Mound had this silvery rock in it, and the Native Americans were doing all this digging in there. Well, they were trying to get the rock that wasn't frost cracked. They're trying to get good quality stone. But everybody else thought, well, it's got to be silver. So they were even dynamiting up there trying to get to the silver, and they never found any. But they sure tried.
So it was being imported from somewhere else? Or?
No, the Native Americans were digging the lithic stone. They wanted a rock. But the American settler thought they're digging for silver, so we were going to blast for find some more. Yeah, Doc.
What I've found is that about 10% of the sites will have paleo. And this area had a heavy habitation because of the springs in our terrain. I was born and raised in southern Minnesota, and that was a whole different culture. We found boiling stones and more for the buffalo over there, and less campsites in a certain area. Here, I live on top of the hill, and from to Blair to town, I'll guarantee you there's probably 50 campsites. And every old settler, when he came and settled by a spring, like the Scow Farm that I bought at the base of the hill, that was a sandy campsite. When I tore the barn down and did some site preparation to put a pole building up, I found 6 artifacts just in one little area. That was a campsite. And the first thing you do when you look in the spring, you want high ground along a stream, because they always wanted high ground for drainage, and they were always close to water. They overwintered in the end of a valley by a big spring. That you'll find. And first thing you'll find is the lithic material. For every artifact they made, they produced 60 little chips. The little bitty chips. And then they traded these stones. Hickston site, I get the archaeology magazine, and you'll get Hickston points in Pennsylvania, and I have one site where Darby, my archaeologist who worked with Brozart and them, found a beautiful little archaic Knife River awl. And that came from Knife River, where Lewis and Clark overwintered with the Mandan Indians. The Knife River comes out of Mandan, and it's kind of like a caramel, very distinct. And on that same site, I found 3 more beautiful scrapers. And so that got traded. They traded these rocks, and they usually traded them in blanks. A couple of years ago, I was over by Ettrick on a site that I had hunted for years. And here, all of a sudden, is a great big western rock that had to have been traded into this campsite that isn't indigenous to this area. It's from Wyoming. It's an agate type thing. And that shouldn't be there. That was on this campsite and had been laying there for 6,000 to 7,000 years. The other thing you'll find is that the Paleo man was a really good workmanship. His materials, but that guy was talented to put that fluted point in there. And then the archaic, that's going to be the bulk of what you find. And they're losing their talent. And when you get to the woodland, those people weren't craftsmen at all. They made little triangles and their stuff. They lost the art of flint knapping. But when you find a nice old paleo item, it's usually, boy, this guy was a flint napper.
Yeah, I figure there should be more paleo sites here than we expect because we weren't glaciated. So they could be here while the glaciers were here.
Now, in the archaeology magazine 2 months ago, they just revealed a dig in Douglas, Wyoming, on a little plateau sticking out that is a paleo campsite. And they found a pre-Clovis in a mastodon bone. And they've done a huge excavation. If you Google Douglas, Wyoming paleo site, and you'll get an overview of it. And that's back 16,000. But it's BP. Archaeologically, they call it BP, before present. They don't have the birth of Christ. So 16,000 BP would actually be 14,000 BC.
Yeah, see, in California, they hit that Sereti mastodon over there. And there's an old bone up here. And see, the jawbone has got really good marrow in it. So this has been smashed to get the jawbone out. And there's a couple of dings right out of here, which tells me that this bone was broke when it was green. Green bone breaks different than dry bone. So you can tell when this bone was smashed, it was still fresh. And the Sereti mastodon in California, when they hit that with road construction, they didn't even want to tell the archaeologist department that they hit it. Because when they dated it, was 130,000 years old. And them bones are smashed, they put them on an anvil and they cracked them to get the marrow out of them. And they were all cracked green. They said that it'd be awful, awful hard to have that many mammoths trample on these bones to break all these bones. And they're sorted, and the hammering stones are there, but you know, flat earth theory, you know, you fall off the edge. They can't be here that long. But that's an old site there, but she's still being fought over. The same thing that Monteverde down there. They said there could be 40,000 years old. But right now they're giving them 14,000. They said, we'll go with that, but it could be 40,000 years old. So they beat the glacier, they beat everybody. They figure the first people probably came by boat. Yeah, they had to come by boat. Because even the old theory, Clovis first, the Cornella ice sheet and the Laurentine, they were bumped together. They didn't open until around 11,000. So you couldn't get here, you know, across land in time to spread across the whole United States. And there's more Clovis east of the Mississippi than west. Maybe there's more people there to find them quicker. That's a possibility. But still, it seems that there seem to be more sites and more heavily used. Clovis is the United States point. You don't find Clovis someplace else in the world. It's bifacial flaking. A lot of the early flakes, it's only one side has worked. It's the uniface. But once the Clovis come, they worked both sides of a point, fluted it off. And it's only found in the United States. You don't find it anyplace else in the world. So it's really a unique thing. But I said, the more you know about archaeology, the less you know. The questions always come, how come, why? You know, I guess another reason to dig harder, you know, but to find out more answers. But like I said, there's no written record, so these people, I said, they were kind of forgotten many years, but I says, archaeology is doing a pretty good job trying to bring back some of what they've learned and what they've lost, you know, but, you know, there's two sides to every story, you know, I suppose. So. Okay, with that, we're going to quit for tonight. Look at 7:30, right on the money.